Hi, this is Érika from a small robot studio. In this video, I'll show you the complete process I followed to sculpt this Pallas cat in Nomad Sculpt. As I review the footage of the process, I'll make stops to show you different techniques I used. I start with the head of the cat. This is simply a box, a cube, with rounded corners. And I am shaping it by making selections, mask selections, and with the gizmo, moving, scaling, rotating. You can use any other tool for this. You can go with move, play, or flatten, anything to modify the shapes. I just find that I get cleaner shapes. And I can also work on larger sections of the model instead of just the little bits that the brush can touch. For this process to work, you have to start with a very low resolution mesh. You will notice that I blur the masks. This is so the area that is changing fades nicely into the area that wasn't touched. Otherwise, it would look like a weird dramatic change. Let's stop for a second and let me show you how this works. I'm gonna add a simple box to my scene and I'm gonna turn on wire down here. In the parameters section, I'm gonna set the slider to 2. And then on the next section, topology, I'm gonna lower this number. Using these two parameters is gonna give you nice round corners. I can now validate this. Let's zoom out. I'm gonna get out of perspective to make more accurate selections. Selection mask, I'm gonna set this to rectangle and select the top. Here on the mask menu, I'm gonna blur this. I'm gonna change the location of this pivot by tapping on this lock. I'll move it to the base of the shape, tap the lock again, and scale. Depending on how much you blur the mask, the fade will change. I'm gonna go back and blur it a few more times. Try again, and this line is much cleaner than before. On the other hand, if I do not blur this at all, the result will look like this. Alright, let's get back to the cat. I also use a lot of smooth tool with low intensity to clean surfaces. You gotta be careful because the smooth can destroy shapes. I am happy with the volume and the silhouette of the head, so I carry on blocking in the different pieces that make the cat. Pretty much every single shape that I create is a simple primitive with rounded corners. With the tube tool, I create the tail, also giving it rounded corners. I don't like to validate it so I can change the position later. And back to the body, I continue using the masking and gizmo method to shape it. There is a little bit of experimentation on the design, but before even opening Nomad, I start all projects by looking for a reference and making study sketches. After getting familiar with the subject that I'm depicting, I make more drawings, stylizing and simplifying the shapes. While still being on paper, I'm thinking in advance of what kind of primitives I would use in Nomad and how I would modify them. Now I'm creating a plane as a temporary floor to judge how long the legs are gonna be. Just as I created the tail, I'm gonna use the tube tool to create the neck and the legs. I love how you can give the caps different radiuses and just in general that you can get a nice line of action by modifying the points. It's super useful for creating complex cylinders. I don't want the top flat, but instead round. So I use the move tool with a special fall off and normal activated. Let me show you how this works. By default, the move tool will let you pull or push a surface into any direction. When I activate normal, it's gonna only move perpendicular to the surface. Now on the brush settings, I'm gonna scroll down until I find this graph. You'll realize that the shape that I created with the move tool and the graph is the same. If I tap on it, there are several options that I can choose from. I'll go back, change it maybe for this, and the result will be different. Let's try another one. Or if I want something spherical like what I did before, I choose the circular graph. Back to my Pallas cat blocking. I really wanted to make him feel chunky. These cats have really thick fur, are in general really round and square. I'm not really using any new tool at this point. It's all about using the gizmo, the move or drag tool. The objective is to get clear, pleasing volumes, a good silhouette. I am not gonna go into any detail until it works. Even if it's really low resolution, I try to push it to look as good as possible. If the volumes are good, then detail is gonna work later. Now it's a good time to start blocking in the face. And it's the very same thing that I'm doing. At this point, I'm using a lot the mirror option. So I'm blocking in only one volume and the program is automatically giving me the other side. For the eyes, I'm gonna create like two eyeballs, one slightly smaller than the other one. I really like painting in a pupil. It's a good reference to judge if it's going in the right direction. It's kind of weird to look at a character with blank eyes. And by having these two spherical volumes, one slightly bigger than the other one, I can flatten it right in the middle, and this is gonna give me the eyelids. By having them separated in pieces, it's so much easier to me to control the shapes. For now, I'm just gonna leave them as half spheres to focus on the rest of the blocking. I'd rather see all the pieces before going into more detailed shapes to have a better judgment of how everything works as a whole. The initial blocking stage took me around an hour, 54 minutes to be exact. Spend time doing the blocking. This first stage is gonna be key. This is what can make or break your models. Before this point, I was not using any fancy brush. I didn't even touch clay or crease. After carving a little cavity for the eyes, I can detail the shape of the eyelids a little bit better. I spent quite a bit of time doing this shape, and I even come in later and modify it again. Your models are always going to have an area that is going to be more important than others, that is going to be the center of attention. So you're going to make sure that it is impeccable. And for those areas that people are not really going to spend that much time looking at, maybe the bottom of the belly, it's not worth it to spend as much time detailing. For the ears, I'm going to use the project tool. This tool allows me to push the mesh into any given shape. I like to use the path method because I can control those points and modify them. And I do several attempts before I reach a result that I actually like. It's looking good, so I'm gonna subdivide my meshes. What this means is that I'm adding extra resolution. Each polygon is divided by 4. I love using MultiResolution because it gives me the option to go back and forth into the original low resolution count or move higher. I'll show you real quick how to do this. I have my cube. I'm gonna go into the topology menu. First tap MultiRes, and I'm gonna tap on subdivide. See how I get now? Double the count. I have a slider which gives me access to both levels. When I am on the higher levels with more resolution, I can work with details. I can come back down to the lowest levels, make big adjustments to the volume, without losing these details. So yeah, that's the secret behind this workflow. I see a lot of beginners start with super dense meshes right away into detailed sculpting, and the end result looks kind of blobby, not very clean surfaces. This approach is going to give you a lot more control, and on time, we will get to detail. There's a time for it. It's just not at the beginning. Make sure that you are saving regularly. I like to make new versions instead of saving over and over the same file in case something goes wrong, gets corrupted, I don't lose the whole thing. And now I am gonna select several meshes at the same time and I'm gonna combine them. I'm gonna merge them to create one thing with more resolution. To do this, you select several pieces and then hit voxel merge. I experiment a little bit with the correct number to make sure that it's not super low, that it destroys the shapes, but also not so high that it's so dense that it's difficult to control. It's easy to lose the shape of corners like those that I have in the eyelids. Here's something to watch out for when you have meshes with multi-resolution. Even though the surfaces look smooth and high-res, when doing the voxel merge, they kind of revert back and look very polygonal. So before doing the merge, make sure to delete the lowest subdivision levels to only have one, so when you merge them, it maintains a smooth surface. With a higher resolution mesh, it's time to do some detail. But first thing, I have to do some cleanup because the voxel merge tends to leave some imperfections, but it's pretty easy to get rid of them with a bit of smoothing. For sharp corners like those on the eyelids, use a combination of the flatten and crease tool. Crease is gonna carve sharp lines, but when reversing its action, it's gonna pull out corners nicely. Flatten is one of my favorite tools to polish surfaces. By default, it's gonna push down and flatten bumps. But again, reverse its action and it's gonna fill up holes and valleys. Don't forget I have videos reviewing a lot of these tools with a lot of detail, so just check them out in our channel. Nomad has a lot of different sculpting brushes, and if you use software like ZBrush, they have even more so. Yet, most of the work I do is with as few as 3 or 4 brushes, so don't let the fancy tools impress you. You can do so much with the simplest tools. We are reaching my 2-hour mark, and you'll appreciate that I'm stuck in this tiny portion of the model, fighting the topology. Take breaks during your sculpting sessions, especially when you're stuck in details and redoing the same thing over and over again. You're gonna be better at spotting what works and what needs work. I show what I had so far to Michael, my husband, who also creates content for this channel if you don't know this. And his opinion was that although the design was appealing, nice looking, I have failed at capturing the grumpy sad look of the Pallas cat. I got tunnel vision. I was so frustrated, so focused making the corners look clean that I lost track of the design as a whole. So make sure you zoom out, step back, and focus on the bigger picture.
And always listen to your husband.
A little piece of advice for improving the quality of your models, especially for cartoon designs, is to aim for clean lines. These lines on top are flowing somewhat okay continuously in one direction. But this bottom one wobbles. It creates a bump. No matter how you rotate your model, you must have clean lines flowing smoothly. Switching the madcap shading will be helpful at this stage. A different lighting setup suddenly makes the defects super visible. Good for spotting wobbly lines and messy surfaces with bumps and valleys. Shiny madcaps are gonna be the least forgiving, great to highlight imperfections. After working for a bit on these adjustments, I'm just gonna switch back to my matte looking madcaps, which I prefer for sculpting. Most of these madcaps that you see on this video are available in our Gumroad Store, and given that this has already become advertisement time, it's only appropriate for me to take a pause to acknowledge the group of amazing people who support the channel via Patreon. Thank you so much, guys! As a reward out of this video, you will get this model posed and ready for painting. If you're not a supporter yet and you want to access this model and our growing library of rewards, visit us at patreon.com/smallrobotstudio. Alright, that's enough self-promotion for today, let's continue. In regards to the design changes, I'm using a very basic shape language, a combination of round and square shapes. Round shapes are associated with softness and youth. They are great for evoking this feeling of cuteness. Think of babies. They are quite round. The chunky body of my Pallas cat is not an accident. However, the face has mostly square shapes. The rigidness of squares evokes seriousness and a strict nature. If we compare the lines of the model before and after, you'll notice that my new lines generally follow a very square nature. Our Pallas cat before kinda looked drowsy, but now it looks grumpy. Cute and grumpy. Round and square. You can learn a lot more about this shape language applied to character design on a video that I made on 2020, a bit of time ago. There is a lot that you can achieve just with circles, squares, and triangles, but there's also more advanced shapes that I talk about. I'm gonna speed up a little bit here because again, I'm doing and redoing the same bit over and over. Part of the reason why I'm not getting anywhere is because I'm fighting the topology. If I go into MultiResolution and add a new level, this is gonna subdivide the whole mesh. But there's another way in which I can approach this. Sometimes I like to use dynamic resolution. This is gonna change the topology of my mesh. I can add density on areas with detail and reduce it on areas that are simple. As you can see, this is isolated merely on where I'm working. The things I don't touch with my brush are left the same. Generally, if you have trouble smoothing an area that got too bumpy and it's got high resolution, it's just better to reduce this resolution with dynamic topology. It's gonna save you a lot of time. Not to mention that if you have a device that struggles for memory and limits you quite a bit how much you can subdivide your model, you can use this approach and you will only add polygons where you need them. Look closely at what I'm doing at the nose. This is a topology I got from a voxel merge. Then I go with my brush on top with dynamic topology and I am reducing the size of these polygons, adding more density to it, just on the area that I'm touching with my brush. Now I can work this with a lot more detail than before. I'm gonna skip ahead around 20 minutes of work because this is very repetitive tweaking that is not different from what you already saw. It's actually quite boring to watch. A lot of modeling is tweaking. Anyway, we are now at the point where I've spent around 3 hours and 15 minutes on this model. I've spent probably 80% of this time just working on the face, so it's definitely time to move on to the body. The body suffered very little change after the blocking. Of course, a little bit of polishing is always needed after a voxel merge, since it tends to leave imperfections where the volumes intersect. The back of the body, where it connects to the tail, looks really awkward from a top view. Early on the blocking, I forgot to hide the tail and missed this issue. I was able to fix it in the high resolution one simply by using the move tool. But this is not always gonna be the case. You'll be surprised how much time it saves you to simply redo something rather than try to fix things that went wrong. Moving on, it was a last minute choice to add toes. I like the design with the simple legs, but at the same time it felt like most of the body was made of big shapes, so having something small would add variety by contrasting those big shapes. Any idea that you have, just sketch it out. Before deciding if it works or not, experiment with it. You may have experienced having an idea that sounded super good on your mind, but as soon as you say it out loud, it makes no sense. The opposite also happens. Ideas with lots of potentials which we discard too early. So say things out loud, sketch them out, or in this case, block them out. I wasn't sure if those toes were gonna work, but I gave it a go. It was easy to simply erase those cubes if it didn't work. Ultimately, I was happy with them, so I merged them into the main body. I have reached the point of the final cleanup. I mainly focus on corners because you know that voxel merge will often mess them up. The pinch tool is gonna be another useful brush, helping you to sharpen corners that got rounded. Anyway, here is the final result before doing any posing. Posing is another topic. As always, I'd love to see the work that you create. Feel free to tag me on social media. And happy sculpting! That's it for this tutorial. If you find it useful, make sure that you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we are bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking in the link below.